the internal, I suppose, budgetary aspects of Safe Walk. I don't have any official position with which to investigate that, but I would immediately do so if I was elected. I have heard it's about $30 per walk. That does seem ludicrous to me. I'm sure there are ways that you can trim the fat on that kind of operation, but still have a viable, incredible Safe Walk organization that still allows students to be safe, but perhaps it would be much more cost effective. Perhaps you could institute some sort of tier system where some people are volunteers and some people are employees. I would have to look into it further. It's not a primary component of my campaign, but I would investigate this.
Yeah, Safe Walk is quite an important issue, and it's one that I have quite a bit of experience with as a member of last year's budget committee. Last year's budget was really the year when the structural deficit problems came clearly into focus, and there was a very concerted effort to avoid any unnecessary spending in that budget. And so a lot of services were not thrilled with what they got, and it's an unfortunate situation. But in the case of Safe Walk, what we said very clearly was, although this is a very expensive program, we're not going to start cutting the core functions before we have a viable alternative to what's happening right now. And we're moving towards a place where we do have that alternative. Pavani, who's an incredible executive coordinator of student services, has been looking at streamlining these operations. And one of the really worthwhile things to look into further is the possibility that the Safe Walk coordinator can merge with the safety office, which is one of the new AMS services, which used to be an AMS service that was not officially under the services banner. And by merging those together, there's a potential to achieve a significant number of efficiencies, because a lot of the messaging that they use is the same and can be redundant. And we can try to streamline that so that, if anything, the messaging becomes more effective, because instead of getting two emails that partially overlap, you get one that is direct and to the point. And another issue that comes in in addition to the budgeting is the fact that all of these positions, their job descriptions are usually quite often listed in either the AMS code or in various procedures manuals. And I have quite significant experience amending in a very pragmatic way code and policy issues, including at the Arts Undergraduate Society, substantially upgrading the descriptions for various executive and coordinator positions. And on the national level, in fact, at the Canadian Political Science Students Association conference last year in Edmonton, I was one of the leaders in drastically rewriting the entire constitution of that organization to deal with the fallout from fraudulent election in a previous year. So I have a lot of experience with the knowledge, both from a budgetary perspective and a code perspective, to really implement the changes that need to happen.
All right, sort of to continue along the same lines, Kyle, you talked about a structural deficit that's been going on at the UBC Alma Mater Society, and what we're seeing is, from what I've been told, it's $280,000 a year is what the sign that's being held up. This is pretty huge. Wow. There are two ways to deal with that. One way is to find more money, which is always the hardest way, and the other way is to cut things, which will always get people angry at you. Going into actual specifics in terms of where you do it, what would you cut or where would you find money? Start with Rory and work our way around.
Sure. My understanding of the structural deficit is that, and this is from talking with former executives and people who are close to the AMS in a way that they could have access to the information, is that it's part of a general economic malaise that Canada is going through right now, because most of the services that the AMS makes money on are things like food and service like that, which people cut back on during times of recession or slow growth in the economy. I think really what we have to do is just ride out this period and not, in this time of economic uncertainty, cut social programs that students have said that they really need and benefit from. So, in the finding more money aspect, I think it's really a matter of time and patience and tightening the belt in certain areas where you can, but protecting the programs that the AMS has provided for students throughout the years.
Yes, there is definitely an element of truth to what Rory is saying. When you look at the specific areas where the revenue is decreased, it's very clear that a lot of them are the result of a lack of discretionary income on the part of students. For instance, within the food and beverage department, the area that has received the largest decrease by quite a considerable margin is alcohol sales, which suggests that those are viewed as a luxury and students are having to make priorities and to not purchase those. But with that said, if you are to factor in an increase in revenue, quite generous increase in revenue from the food and beverage and catering departments of the AMS, which are two of our greatest revenue generating sources, you will still find a structural deficit well in excess of $100,000. And there are a few things that we really need to do. One of the key things is looking at not so much the automatically funded or the renewable funding areas, but one of the things we need to look at is the areas that are discretionary and non-replenished funds. For instance, the AMS has a President's Fund, and unfortunately the guidelines for use of that fund are very ambiguous, and this has led it to be used in a lot of cases that have been viewed as quite controversial. And so working as a part of Budget Committee, and in fact as an extension of the Executive Oversight Committee, of which I was the chair, we've been looking at ways to tighten up the terms of reference for the President's Fund and for others' funds that currently, very unfortunately, are becoming slush funds. And I think that if we put clear terms of reference and we say the President's Fund can only be used in the case of supermajority votes, only in these dollar amounts and only in these specific areas, for instance, student initiatives and, in fact, very innovative student initiatives, I think we do a great deal of tightening up without touching the really core services, because the President's Fund, frankly, is quite often used on rather luxurious services, or it's used as a stopgap measure when the appropriate executive didn't follow prudent budgeting measures in the initial stages of the budgeting process.
So I don't actually sit on budget, so I don't know the total nitty-gritty details, but what I do understand is from what I've heard from council, and I do agree with Kyle, if we were to vote on reallocating of such as President's funds, and I do believe there are a couple other funds like that within the budget, if we actually allocate them to the proper specific areas, then we might be able to control the money that the AMS has and to spend it more wisely and more effectively. As I mentioned earlier, I think it's best to look at what our priorities are and where we're generating the most money. As Kyle had mentioned, our money from alcohol sales have dropped, so we need to take all the conditions into consideration and look at how the economy and how the culture outside at UBC Life is changing, so we can make sure that money is being put into the right things, and if we do have to cut from things, hopefully we don't, that they're being cut to at the most minimal degree and from things that where we can actually afford to do so. Yeah.
All right, so one of the things that's sort of come up a lot in the last couple of years, and I've actually moderated a number of debates in the last couple of years, and I've asked this question to a lot of candidates over the years for AMS Rep and VP External, is where you stand in terms of the best way to enact change on a social and lobby level. The two sort of general principles are, one is protest and one is engagement. And so to explain that, one is things like days of action where you get out and you hold signs and you shout and you argue for things. And the other is engagement where you sit down in meetings with officials and politely and civilly ask for change. Now I'm going to point out that I think everybody will agree that some basket of the two is necessary. But if we could get your preference for which one you prefer over the other, and why. That's what I'd like to see. So I think we started with Rory first last time, so we'll start with Kyle this time.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely feel that it's good that you pointed out that there's a bit of an arbitrary distinction there, because I think if you had to choose one, ultimately you would have to go the route of next step lobbying with the politicians.